Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today I will be explaining the powers and abilities of Sentry. Bob Reynolds, aka Sentry, one of the most powerful heroes in the Marvel Universe, and one of the most powerful villains. In today's video, I will start off with Sentry's origin. The story starts off with the Weapon X program, aka the Super Soldier program, the program which created Steve Rogers and Wolverine. A branch of the program decided to recreate the Super Soldier Serum, but increase its power 1,000 times over. The original Super Soldier Serum was a success, and gave Steven Rogers numerous superhuman abilities. But Cap was the only one ever made, because Abraham Erskine, the man who created the Super Soldier formula, was killed. So a version of the formula was recreated as best as they could, and then its power was increased over time, over years and years of experimentation. Over time, the serum was forgotten about and never tested. Eventually, the serum was put into a research lab and was basically forgotten about. This is where Bob Reynolds comes into the story. Bob was a young man who suffered from schizophrenia. Bob's mental condition deteriorated, and he made a friend who was into drugs and alcohol, and got Bob into it. Bob's friend worked at a research lab that housed the Super Sentry Serum. Bob's friend left the door to the research lab open, and Bob stole the Super Sentry Serum, trying to get high off of it. After drinking it, Bob was transformed into the Sentry, and he received numerous superpowers. So, what the serum did was it gave Bob the ability to manipulate every molecule in his body, and able to manipulate other molecules around him, essentially giving him the power to have any power that he desires. But due to Bob's fractured mental state, when he's in his Sentry form, he's limited to only the powers that he would desire to make him the ultimate superhero. Now I will go over all of Bob's abilities in his Sentry form. We'll start with one of Bob's most basic powers that he uses all the time, his flight. Sentry can fly well over hypersonic speeds, and when he's in space, Sentry can fly much faster than the speed of light. Next up, we have Sentry's energy projection abilities. Sentry can put out huge amounts of energy. Sentry is able to muster so much energy that he was able to harm the Hulk in one of his most powerful forms. Sentry can release it in gigantic explosions, blasts from his fists, or from his eyes. Sentry was even able to make an energy tornado that trapped the Hulk and did major damage to him. Now for Sentry's ludicrous durability. Sentry was able to take a punch from Thing like it was absolutely nothing. During World War Hulk, Sentry was able to survive major punishment from Hulk. Once, while fighting Terrax, who is a herald of Galactus and commands the power cosmic, a portion of Galactus' power, Terrax shot his cosmic energy at Sentry, and Sentry blocked it with his hand like it was nothing. Sentry was even durable enough to contain the force and energy of a cosmic cube. Now on to Sentry's strength level. Sentry was able to match Hulk in strength, and not just a regular Hulk. It was King Hulk when he came to fight in World War Hulk. He was so angry at the Illuminati because of the supposed murder of his wife, and Sentry was able to stand up to him and match him. And the two beat each other until they both reverted to Bruce Banner and Bob Reynolds. Bob was able to backhand Thing like he was a fly. Bob was able to tear apart Dr. Doom's armor like it was nothing. Bob was able to catch Terrax's hand and then tear his axe in half, beating him easily. As for lifting, Sentry was able to lift the entire SHIELD helicarrier by himself. Now to explain Bob's dark side. Due to Bob's split personality disorder, he made one personality, which is the Sentry, and during his time as a hero, he made his own arch nemesis that he fought. But it turns out that it was actually himself. a persona called the Void, which he struggles to contain after he realizes that his worst enemy is actually himself. This shows just how powerful Bob Reynolds' molecular control is, that he can manifest another being who's a part of himself, and they can fight each other. Now on to Void's powers. Void is very versatile and can do many different things. Void has the ability to take whatever shape he wants to. Sometimes he takes the shape of a gigantic monster, or a strange-looking demon thing, or both. Sentry's giant monster form was so powerful, he fought the Avengers, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, Doctor Strange, and the Inhumans all at the same time, and was winning. In Void's black tendril form, he can tie people up and make his spikes sharp. He was so strong he was able to grab the Hulk and break every single bone in his body. Another one of Void's powers is the ability to read people's minds and show them their greatest fears. Void did this to the agents of Wakanda. As we can see here, he's showing Okoye, Black Panther, betraying her and killing her. And when the Void overtook Sentry's body, it was able to survive a strike from Thor's hammer with no damage. And the Void Sentry was able to tear Ares in half. The only thing capable of killing Bob was after Iron Man caused the SHIELD helicarrier to crash on top of him. Bob came back to his senses and begged the mighty Thor to kill him. Thor delivered the final blow and then flew Sentry into the sun, letting his body burn. So Bob is three separate beings. He's Bob Reynolds, and he can transform into either the Golden Guardian Sentry or the Evil Void, both of which are extremely powerful. At one point, Bob merged all three of his personas into one being. In this form, Bob had all the powers of both Void and Sentry, making him nearly unstoppable. Bob could use Void's black tendril powers to make nearly invincible shields. And he was able to fight off a whole team of Avengers by himself. He was even able to blow back Captain Marvel and Thor at the same time with his energy burst. This new form of Sentry was so powerful, the Avengers could do nothing to stop him, and all they could do was let him go. Eventually, this version of Sentry resurfaced, attacking the agents of Wakanda and using their greatest fears against them. Thor arrived on scene with using a portion of the Odin Force, and they were able to fight evenly. This was before Thor got the full powers of the Odin Force, or the Thor Force. So I think now that Thor has his full powers of the Thor Force, I think if he fought this version of Sentry now, Thor would most likely win. Now back to Sentry's molecular control powers. Back when Sentry started his superhero career, he essentially created a tower for himself to stay in. And when he joined the Avengers, his tower appeared on top of Stark Tower. Sentry's tower is called the Watchtower. And what's interesting about it is that it has clear design choices that look like the Void and Sentry. Another thing Sentry was able to do is once when he thought his wife Lindy was dead and killed by Ultron, Bob held his hand over her face and healed her, even though he didn't know that he was healing her. Later he came back and saw that Lindy was alive, and she didn't even remember that she died. So the exact limit of Sentry's molecular manipulation is unknown. It's possible that he could do literally anything. One thing that's very interesting about Sentry is that he was one of the first superheroes to be active before the Fantastic Four. In the Marvel Universe, what is considered the Age of Heroes, when all the heroes started popping up like Spider-Man and the Avengers, the Fantastic Four were the first ones who started the trend. But Sentry actually came before them. Sentry actually had a long career with the other heroes. They came to his wedding, he was friends with the Avengers and the X-Men. He was even friends with Hulk and mentored Spider-Man. He even had his own sidekick named Scout, who had very similar powers to him. And he had a pet dog called Watchdog, who had superpowers. It could fly and had super strength. At one point, Doctor Strange and Mr. Fantastic wiped all the heroes' memories of Sentry, including themselves. It was the first time that Bob realized that Void, his arch nemesis, was him, and they had a huge battle in Manhattan where millions of people died. So it's interesting because Sentry was the greatest hero in the Marvel Universe. But due to the fact that he found out he was also the greatest villain, he had his friends Doctor Strange and Mr. Fantastic wipe everyone's memories, including their own and his. Eventually, Bob got his memories back and joined the New Avengers as their main powerhouse. But of course, he couldn't join in every battle, because sometimes he was too afraid to go outside, in fear of the Void returning. After the Civil War and the Superhuman Registration Act was passed, Bob joined Iron Man's Avengers team, the Mighty Avengers, and served under the direction of the government. And when Norman Osborn took over the Mighty Avengers and transformed them into the Dark Avengers, Sentry served him as well. All the confusion with Norman Osborn and the Dark Avengers and who was right and who was wrong drove Sentry to become the Void once again. And during the Siege of Asgard, like I already went over, he fought the Avengers and Thor had to put an end to him. Bob Reynolds is one of the most interesting characters in the Marvel Universe because he's like all of us. Like this picture here, with the Sentry belt glowing underneath his shirt. Like all of us, we have the potential to be a golden guardian for good. Or we have the potential to become a black void. We all have the ability to be creatures of good or engines of destruction. And like Bob, most of our worst enemies are ourselves. And we have to choose to be the Sentry or the Void. Currently in the comics, Sentry is dead. He was killed by Null, the symbiote god. Sentry is a great character, and I hope that Marvel brings him back soon in a very cool. If you want to read about Sentry to know more of him, because he never really appears in any other popular media besides comics, I recommend reading the Sentry Reborn storyline, and then of course, the Siege of Asgard storyline, which is called Siege. It's only a 4-part series, and it showcases Sentry's powers. Well, that's everything. Thanks for watching.